A silver bucket of ice sat on a sideboard in the imperial suite of the Ritz Paris in the early hours of 31st August 1997. Inside it, a bottle of champagne, unopened. The ice had barely begun to slacken. Across the Seine, sirens were audible through the open window, faint and overlapping, the kind of sound Parisians learn to ignore. The staff who would later enter the suite to clear the room found the bucket exactly where Dodi Fayed's butler, René Delorme, had placed it, on his employer's instruction earlier that evening. The bottle was never poured. The celebration it had been prepared for never happened. By the time anyone thought to remove it, the woman it had been chilled for was being pronounced dead in a hospital 3 miles away. That bucket and the suite it stood in are the starting point for a story most people think they already know. The public memory of Diana, Princess of Wales, on her final night holds a single dominant image: a woman pursued, isolated, abandoned by the institution that had once contained her, dying alone in a tunnel beneath the Place de l'Alma. It is a powerful image. It is also, according to the people who actually served her in those final 10 hours, almost entirely wrong. The staff who moved in and out of the imperial suite that night, the security men in the corridor, the butlers and waiters and runners who carried plates and messages and telephones, describe something different. They describe a suite that was never empty. A corridor in constant motion, a princess surrounded, until the last 23 minutes of her life, by people who knew her by name. The man who has done most to insist on that distinction is Paul Burrell. He served Diana for 10 years, from 1987, formally titled her Butler from 1993, and was the person she once called, in a phrase that became one of the most quoted of her marriage, her rock. He was not in Paris on the night of the crash. He was in London, asleep in a small apartment within Kensington Palace, waiting for her return. But he had been at the other end of the telephone for most of the previous decade, and he was at the other end of it that evening too. His 2003 memoir, A Royal Duty, together with René Delorme's earlier 1998 account, and the sworn testimony both men later gave to the French investigating magistrate Hervé Stéphane and to Lord Justice Scott Baker's British inquest of 2007 and 2008, form the spine of the testimony that follows. They are not the only sources, they are the closest. To understand what was at stake that night, one has to understand what Diana had become by August 1997. She was 36 years old. Her decree absolute from the Prince of Wales had been issued exactly 1 year and 2 days before her death, on 28 August 1996. The divorce had stripped her of the style Her Royal Highness, a piece of bureaucratic surgery that struck her, by her own account to friends, as a deliberate diminishment. In every other respect, however, her stature had grown. In January, she had walked across an active minefield in Angola for the Halo Trust, a sequence of photographs that did more for the global campaign against landmines than any government communiqué had managed. In early August, she had repeated the gesture in Bosnia. Her power was no longer institutional. It was personal, and it was vast. Her sons, Prince William, then 15, and Prince Harry, then 12, had spent part of the summer holiday with her in the Mediterranean and had returned to their father at Balmoral, in Aberdeenshire, in the 3rd week of August. She had spoken to them on the telephone from Paris on the afternoon of 30th August. It would be the last conversation she had with them. The Prince of Wales was at Balmoral with the boys. The Queen was there too. The royal family, in late summer, performed its annual contraction into Scotland. Diana, that summer, was elsewhere. She was, specifically, with the Fayeds. Mohammed al-Fayed, the Egyptian-born owner of the Ritz Paris and of Harrods in Knightsbridge, was a long-standing family friend, more so to her late father than to her, but a familiar presence. He had invited her to his villa in Saint-Tropez in July. There she had been introduced, or reintroduced, to his eldest son, Dodi Fayed, a film producer of 41, whose previous engagement had been quietly broken off only weeks before. By the end of July, they were aboard the Jonical, the Fayed yacht, cruising the Mediterranean. By early August, the photographs were everywhere. The image of Diana on the diving board in a one-piece swimsuit and what the British tabloids christened the kiss picture, published on the 10th of August, made their relationship the most watched romance on earth. Whatever it was no longer private. On Saturday the 30th of August, 1997, the couple flew from Sardinia to Paris aboard a Harrods Gulfstream 4. They landed at Le Bourget at approximately 3:20 in the afternoon. Photographers were waiting on the tarmac, and more were waiting on the road into the city, and from the moment the wheels touched down, they were pursued. The pursuit that day was not metaphorical. It was a procession of motorcycles weaving between cars at speed, lenses pressed against windows at traffic lights, the now familiar mechanics of late 20th century celebrity surveillance operating at full intensity. They made an unscheduled stop in the Bois de Boulogne, at the Villa Windsor, the house once occupied by the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, which Mohammed al-Fayed had acquired on a long lease from the city of Paris. They were inside for roughly half an hour. Much has been made of the visit in the years since, by those who wish to read it as the inspection of a future marital home. Burrell, who knew Diana's habits and her sense of theatre, would later argue that the visit has been over-interpreted. Staff present that afternoon described it as a tour, a look at a curiosity, nothing more. They arrived at the Ritz Paris on the Place Vendôme at approximately 5:25 in the afternoon. Diana was shown up to the Imperial Suite, Suite 102, a set of rooms on the first floor that had hosted, over the previous century, most of the people whose names schoolchildren are taught. From the moment she stepped inside, the suite was rarely without someone in it. Hairdressers came, a manicurist came, security men checked the corridor, butlers brought ice and trays and folded napkins. The telephone rang and was answered and rang again. This is the first thing the staff testimony establishes, and it establishes it without dispute. The room was busy. At around 7 in the evening, Diana and Dodi left the hotel and were driven the short distance to his private apartment on the Rue Arsène Houssaye, near the Arc de Triomphe, where they intended to change for dinner. They would return to the Ritz 3 hours later, at 10 to 10 in the evening, under siege from photographers on the Place Vendôme, the lobby briefly chaotic, the revolving doors turning, the Imperial Suite waiting upstairs, and Henri Paul, the acting head of security, off duty and at home, being summoned back to the hotel. The revolving doors of the Ritz Paris turned twice and delivered them back inside. It was 9:50 on the evening of Saturday the 30th of August, 1997. The shouting from Place Vendôme did not stop at the threshold. It pressed against the glass and continued, muffled, while the lobby staff closed ranks around the couple and moved them toward the lifts. Upstairs, the Imperial Suite was waiting. Somewhere across the city, in a quiet apartment, a man named Henri Paul was being telephoned and asked to come back to work. The hotel that received them was an institution operating, that night, with several of its principal officers absent or improvising. Frank Klein, the president of the Ritz Paris, was at his country house in Brittany. His assistant, Claude Roulet, was handling the logistics of the fired party in his stead, moving between the lobby and the suite. Thierry Rocher, the acting night manager, held the front of house together, and Henri Paul, who in normal circumstances would have ended his working day hours earlier, had been recalled as acting head of security because the principals upstairs required someone senior to coordinate the inevitable departure. He arrived back at the hotel at approximately 10 o'clock, dressed in plain clothes, and was seen by several staff members crossing the lobby to greet Trevor Rhys-Jones, Dodi Fayed's bodyguard, and the second protection officer on duty. The first consequential decision of the evening was already being made. Dinner had been booked downstairs at L'Espadon, the hotel's restaurant. By the time the couple reached their floor, the maître d'hôtel had concluded that the dinner could not proceed in the public room. Photographers had infiltrated the restaurant, other diners were staring, and the atmosphere had become, in the polite phrasing of the staff statements later given to the French police, untenable. At around 10 o'clock, the decision was taken to move the meal upstairs. 2 places were laid in the imperial suite. This is the moment from which Paul Burrell, drawing on the contemporaneous accounts of colleagues he knew personally within the Al Fayed organization, builds his central claim. From the instant dinner was transferred to Suite 102, the rooms were never empty. Waiters came up with covered plates. The sommelier brought wine and was sent back for something else. René Delorme, Dodi Fayed's personal butler, was in and out of the corridor and the suite continuously. Security men positioned themselves at the lift and at the service stair. A hairdresser had been present earlier in the day. A manicurist had come and gone. The Princess of Wales was not, in any literal sense, alone for more than minutes at a time. René Delorme's account, published the following year in his 1998 memoir, and given in substantively the same form to the French investigators under Judge Hervé Stéphane, supplies a particular detail that has never been satisfactorily explained away. Sometime that evening, in the suite, Dodi Fayed pulled him aside and told him to have champagne ready on ice for when they returned from a brief outing later that night. Delorme understood this, he said, as a specific instruction with a specific occasion attached. He believed an engagement was imminent. A ring, purchased earlier that day from the jeweller Repossy, whose premises stand a few steps from the hotel on Place Vendôme, was, according to Delorme, in the apartment to which they were planning to go. Whether Dodi Fayed had told the princess any of this is unknown. Delorme could only testify to what he had been told, and he had been told to chill a bottle. This is the thesis that Burrell would press, in interviews from 2003 onward, against the dominant public memory. The popular image of Diana's last evening is one of harassment and isolation. A woman hunted through a foreign city, retreating into a hotel suite to escape, miserable. The staff who actually attended her describe something else. They describe a princess on the telephone, laughing. They describe a woman ordering simply off the menu, scrambled eggs and asparagus, attentive to those serving her, addressing several of them by name because she had encountered them on previous Al Fayed visits. Burrell's interpretation, offered with the caution of a man who had served her for 10 years, was that in those particular hours she was less lonely than she had been at any point that summer. The loneliness, he argued, was the press's gift to itself after the fact. Honesty requires the countercurrent. Diana made 2 telephone calls from the Imperial Suite that evening, which are documented in the inquest record. One was to Richard Kay of the Daily Mail, a journalist she trusted and used. The other was to Paul Burrell himself at Kensington Palace. The exact contents of both calls remain disputed in their detail. Kay's account and Burrell's account differ in emphasis. What Burrell has consistently maintained is that she sounded happy but pragmatic, that she spoke of withdrawing from public life in the coming months, of giving William and Harry more of her time, of reducing her exposure. She did not, in his recollection, speak of marriage. She did not announce that anything was about to change irrevocably. Whatever was being prepared on a bed of ice in another room, the princess on the telephone gave no indication that she expected to be engaged by morning. Between 11:30 and 11:15 midnight, the plan for departure was assembled in the suite and in the corridor outside it. It was Henri Paul's idea, agreed by Dodie Fayed and accepted by Trevor Rhys-Jones, to use a decoy. The official Range Rover and the second Mercedes would remain at the front entrance on Place Vendôme, where the photographers were massed and waiting. A third car, a Mercedes S280 hired through a service agency, would be brought to the rear service entrance on the Rue Cambon. The principals would leave by the back. The decoys at the front would draw the chase. They would be at the apartment on Rue Arsène Houssaye within 10 minutes. The condition of the man who proposed this plan is the point at which the documentary record must be at its most precise. Subsequent toxicology, conducted in France and reviewed exhaustively by the British Operation Paget investigation, established that Henri Paul's blood alcohol concentration at the time of his death was approximately 3 times the French legal limit for driving. Traces of prescription antidepressants were also present. CCTV footage from the Ritz bar earlier in the evening shows him drinking what staff at the time described as pineapple juice. The discrepancy between what he appeared to drink in public and what was found in his blood has been the soil in which 30 years of conspiracy theory has grown. The 2006 Operation Paget report, running to over 800 pages, examined and accepted the toxicology. The 2008 inquest, under Lord Justice Scott Baker, accepted it again. Henri Paul was, by any clinical measure, unfit to drive. He drove. Trevor Rhys-Jones took the front passenger seat and in doing so departed from the usual Al-Fayed practice, which would have placed a second protection officer in the convoy. There was no second bodyguard in the car. This omission is among the points Mohammed Al-Fayed would raise again and again in the years that followed. Diana and Dodie took the rear bench, Diana behind Rhys-Jones, Dodie behind the driver. At 20 minutes past midnight on the morning of Sunday, the 31st of August 1997, the Mercedes pulled away from the Rue Cambon service entrance. A CCTV camera inside the hotel had captured Diana moments earlier, stepping into the corridor that led to the back door, pausing, smiling faintly at a member of staff who held a door for her. It is the last image of her inside a building. She is composed, attentive, present. The route was direct. South to the river, west along the Cours la Reine, into the underpass beneath the Place de l'Alma. The Mercedes accelerated as it left the embankment and entered the descent into the tunnel. Estimates derived from the wreckage and the road markings placed its speed on entry at approximately 105 kilometers per hour, more than twice the posted limit. Witnesses on motorcycles, themselves in pursuit, would later describe the car swerving, correcting, swerving again. It struck the 13th pillar at approximately 23 minutes past midnight. The sound, according to a maintenance worker in a nearby building who gave a statement to the French police, was a single short report, followed by silence. Then a horn began to sound and did not stop. One headlight was still burning, angled upward against the tunnel wall. Smoke rose from the engine compartment. Within a minute, perhaps less, the first photographers arrived on motorbikes, dismounted, and began to work. No ambulance had yet been called. The wrecked Mercedes sat against the 13th pillar of the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, with one headlight still burning and the horn jammed in a single unbroken note. The first motorcycles braked at the mouth of the underpass within seconds. Cameras came out before stretchers, and then, perhaps 90 seconds after impact, a small dark car coming the other way slowed, pulled over, and a man got out who happened to be a doctor. Dr. Frédéric Maillet was driving home from a party. He was off duty. He carried a basic resuscitation kit in his boot, the kind any French emergency physician keeps in a car. He approached the wreckage, looked inside, and made the rapid triage that years of SAMU work had drilled into him. In the front, 2 men, both beyond help. Henri Paul, killed on impact. Dodi Fayed, the same. In the front passenger seat, the bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones, conscious but with injuries so severe that his survival, in the hours that followed, would be considered a small miracle of trauma medicine. And in the rear footwell, folded against the back of the front passenger seat, a woman with dark blonde hair, breathing, eyes open, semi-coherent. Maillet has stated, consistently, in every interview he has given since 1997, that he did not recognize her. He treated her as he would have treated any injured woman on any French road that night. He fitted an oxygen mask. He spoke to her in English and in French. He has reported that she said something to the effect of, "My God, what's happened?" Thoughts he has been careful to note that the exact words, in the noise of the tunnel and the shock of the moment, cannot be reconstructed with certainty. He has refused, for nearly 3 decades, to embellish. The ambulance arrived. What followed has been argued about in the British press ever since. The journey from the Pont de l'Alma to the Hôpital de la Pitié-Salpêtrière took approximately 40 minutes for a distance of roughly 6 kilometres. To an Anglo-American reader, raised on the doctrine of scoop and run, this looks like negligence. To French emergency medicine, it is doctrine. The SAMU protocol is to stabilise the patient at the scene and in the vehicle, to treat the ambulance as a mobile resuscitation unit, and to move slowly enough that resuscitation can continue uninterrupted. Diana suffered cardiac arrest in the ambulance. She was resuscitated. The vehicle stopped, by some accounts, to allow further intervention. She arrived at the Pitié-Salpêtrière at approximately 2:10 in the morning. For nearly 2 hours, French surgeons attempted to repair what could not be repaired. The injury was a rupture of the upper left pulmonary vein, a tear in one of the great vessels returning blood from the lung to the heart. It is the kind of injury that, even in a hospital car park, kills most of those who sustain it. At 4 o'clock in the morning of 31st of August, 1997, the Princess of Wales was pronounced dead. In London, 300 miles away, the telephone in Paul Burrell's flat at Kensington Palace rang shortly after 1 in the morning local time. He has described the call in his memoir and in interviews. He was told there had been an accident in Paris. The details were unclear. He dressed, drove the short distance to the palace, and let himself into Diana's apartments. He did not yet know that she was dead. He moved through the rooms, turning on lamps. He drew the curtains. He set the kettle. By the time the second call came, telling him she would not be coming home, the sky over Hyde Park was already turning from black to grey, and Burrell was standing in her dressing room, choosing the dress in which she would be buried. He selected a black cocktail dress by Catherine Walker, one of her favoured designers. He laid it out on the bed. This is the moment that, in Burrell's later account, the 2 meanings of "she wasn't alone" collapse into one another. Because Burrell, more than any other single witness, has insisted across 2 decades that the image the world fixed upon that morning was a fiction in two directions. The princess who left the Ritz at 20 past midnight was not the abandoned figure of legend, and the princess who arrived at the Pitié-Salpêtrière was not the random victim of bad luck that the official record would eventually describe. On the first point, his testimony is corroborated. René Delorme, in his 1998 book, described a suite that was warm, busy, and full of voices. The Ritz staff who served the couple that evening described, to French investigators and later to British counsel, a woman who was animated, attentive, and by every visible sign, content. The hairdresser who came to the suite earlier in the evening described laughter. The waiters who carried up the dinner that had been moved from l'Espadon described a princess who thanked each of them by name. The image of a lonely Diana, hounded into a tunnel by a press she could not escape, is not false in its broader outline. The press did pursue her. The tunnel did kill her. But the 10 hours that preceded the 3 minutes in the Mercedes were, in the accounts of the people who actually served them, the opposite of lonely. Burrell has put the point bluntly in interviews. The loneliness narrative, he has said, served the institution she had left. It made her death the inevitable end of a tragic isolation, rather than the contingent result of a series of preventable decisions made inside a single hotel by a small number of named individuals. On the second point, his testimony is more contested, and the documentary record requires care. In October 2003, 6 years after the crash, Burrell published in his memoir, A Royal Duty, what he described as a handwritten letter from Diana, dated October 1996, in which she predicted that a plot was being prepared against her life. The mechanism she named was specific: a car, brake failure, or a serious head injury. The purpose, in her stated belief, was to clear the way for Prince Charles to remarry. Burrell published the letter with the name of the alleged conspirator redacted. That name, widely reported but never officially confirmed, has been the subject of 2 decades of speculation. The letter exists. Burrell produced the original. It was examined at the British inquest of 2007 and 2008 under Lord Justice Scott Baker. Forensic analysis accepted it as a genuine document in Diana's hand. What it proves, however, is a narrower question than it first appears. It establishes the state of mind of the Princess of Wales in October 1996. It establishes that she had voiced, in writing, a fear of being killed in a staged accident. It does not establish that any such plot existed, nor that the events of August 1997 were anything other than what 2 state-level investigations subsequently concluded them to be. Those investigations must be set out plainly. The French judicial inquiry under Judge Hervé Stéphan, concluded in 1999, found that the crash was an accident caused by the intoxication of Henri Paul, his excessive speed, and the pursuit by paparazzi motorcycles. Toxicology established a blood alcohol level approximately 3 times the French legal limit, together with traces of prescription antidepressants. The British Operation Paget report, published in December 2006 after 3 years of investigation by the Metropolitan Police under Lord Stevens, ran to 832 pages and addressed each of the allegations advanced by Mohammed Al-Fayed point by point. Its conclusion was the same: accidental death. The inquest jury, on the 7th of April 2008, returned a verdict of unlawful killing through the grossly negligent driving of Henri Paul and the pursuing vehicles. Not accident, not murder. Fatal recklessness, distributed across several named drivers, none of whom were acting on behalf of any institution. This is where the documentary's argument must be careful. The question is not whether Diana, Princess of Wales, was murdered. Two exhaustive inquiries, conducted under different legal systems with full investigative powers, concluded that she was not. The question Burrell raises is subtler, and it survives the rejection of the conspiracy thesis. It is the question of whose testimony has been allowed to count. The people who were physically present in the imperial suite on the night of 30th August 1997 are a small and identifiable group. Their accounts agree on the essentials, and those accounts have been consistently subordinated in the popular memory of that night to an image constructed almost entirely from the outside, from the photographers at the door, from the editors in London, from the institution at Balmoral. At dawn on 31st of August 1997, Paul Burrell stood in an empty apartment at Kensington Palace and laid out a black dress on a bed. Somewhere in the room, on a side table or a desk, a telephone was still ringing. He did not answer it. Paul Burrell, at Kensington Palace at first light on 31st of August 1997, laying out the black Catherine Walker dress she would be buried in, the phone in the empty apartment still ringing. He did not answer it. There was no one on the other end he wished to speak to, and nothing left to be said that would alter anything. He smoothed the dress on the bed as he had smoothed 1,000 garments before, and waited for the household to wake into a world that no longer contained her. The week that followed has been told many times. The flowers piled chest-high along the railings of Kensington Palace, the queues for the books of condolence stretching into the parks, the silence in London on the morning of 6 September as the gun carriage moved from the palace to Westminster Abbey. Queen Elizabeth II, who had remained at Balmoral with Prince William and Prince Harry through the first stunned days, returned to London on 5th September and addressed the nation that evening, speaking, she said, both as Queen and as a grandmother. The funeral the next day was watched by an estimated 2.5 billion people. Burrell walked in the cortege. He had accompanied her body home from Paris 3 days earlier, on the flight that brought her back to RAF Northolt. In the years that followed, his position grew stranger. In 2002, he stood trial at the Old Bailey on charges of stealing items from Diana's estate. The case collapsed when Queen Elizabeth II recalled, and confirmed through intermediaries, a private conversation in which Burrell had told her he was keeping certain of the princess's papers and possessions safe. The trial ended without verdict. What it left behind was a man who had walked away from royal service holding objects, letters and memories that no one else possessed, and who would, the following year, begin to publish them. This is where the phrase at the centre of this account must be opened out, because it carries more than one meaning. She wasn't alone in that room. In its first and simplest sense, it describes the imperial suite on the evening of 30th August 1997, which by every staff account was a place of continuous motion. René Delorme was there. The Ritz waiters were there. Dodi Fayed was there. The sommelier had brought up the bottle. Security men passed in and out of the corridor. Whatever else may be said about the last hours of the Princess of Wales, she did not spend them in solitude. In its second sense, the phrase reaches back to October 1996 and to the handwritten letter Burrell would later produce, in which she had set down her fears in her own hand. She had not carried those fears alone. She had given them to someone. Whether the foreboding was prophecy, intuition, or the residue of a long and exhausting marital war, is a question the documents cannot answer.
What they establish is that she had spoken. In its third sense, the phrase points to the car itself. Dodi Fayed was in that car. Henri Paul was in that car. Trevor Rhys-Jones was in that car. 3 men, 2 of whom died with her, and 1 of whom survived to remember almost nothing of it. And yet the photograph the world has carried for nearly 3 decades is of a single woman, alone, in a tunnel. The other passengers have been edited down to context. If this account has been useful, subscribing to the channel costs nothing, and there are more stories like this one queued. The bell notification means you will see them when they go up. What the staff testimony provides, taken together, is not a counter-conspiracy. Burrell has never argued, on the evidence of that night, that she was killed by a plot. His position is more careful and more interesting. The Operation Paget report of December 2006 ran to over 800 pages and addressed every allegation Mohammed Al-Fayed had made, point by point, before reaching its conclusion of accidental death. The inquest jury in April 2008 returned a verdict of unlawful killing through grossly negligent driving by Henri Paul and the pursuing photographers. 2 state-level investigations, conducted years apart and under different jurisdictions, arrived at compatible findings. The murder thesis was tested and was not sustained. What Burrell offers instead is a corrective to the image. The Princess of Wales on the evening of 30th of August 1997 was not, by any account from inside the suite, a woman waiting to die. She was animated, she took phone calls, she laughed, she ordered from a menu and ate. She spoke to Richard Kay of the Daily Mail and to Burrell himself at Kensington Palace, and in those conversations she sounded, according to both men, like someone making plans. She was 36 years old. She had survived a marriage, a divorce, a public stripping of her title, and a decade of unrelenting press attention. And she had come out the other side of all of it, still capable of cheerfulness in a hotel room in Paris on a Saturday night in August. The tragedy is not that she died alone. The tragedy is that the 3 minutes which killed her have been permitted to overwrite the 10 hours that came before. Burrell himself is a complicated witness. The reality television appearances, the serialized disclosures, the long second career built on proximity to a dead woman have all qualified his standing in the eyes of historians and of the family he once served. None of that alters the simpler fact. He was in her household for 10 years. He spoke to her on the telephone hours before she died. He was the man who laid out her burial dress. The professors who have written about her, the journalists who have theorized about her, the documentarians who have reconstructed her, were not in any of those rooms. He was. And so, at the end, return to the image with which this account began. The champagne bucket in the imperial suite of the Ritz Paris, ordered by Dodi Fayed earlier that evening, the bottle still inside it, the ice slowly turning to water through the small hours of 31st of August, 1997, as the news travelled outward from the tunnel. No one came back to the suite to drink it. No one came back to the suite at all, except staff, to gather the belongings that had been left behind in the assumption of return. Whether a proposal had been intended that night, as René Delorme believed and stated within months, will never now be confirmed. The man who would have made it did not survive the journey from the rear door of the hotel. What is left is the bottle, unopened, in melting ice, in an empty room above the Place Vendôme. And the question Burrell has, in his own complicated way, pressed against the public memory for more than 20 years. If the Diana the world mourns is not the Diana who actually spent that night at the Ritz, then which one of them is the figure history has preserved, and which one has been quietly, steadily allowed to disappear?